as well as seeing some new friends joining us as well. Welcome to our first presentation of the 2023-24 Parent Discussion Series for Sasco River Center. Really excited to be back. We've got an incredible lineup of presentations coming your way over the course of this year. Our organizing theme for this coming year is what we are calling the 3 C's: connection, compassion, and curiosity. We're going to be presenting a variety of different presentations on the first Tuesday of every month that touch on those critical variables that as clinicians, as well as parents, we have seen are in many ways some of the most important qualities and facets to support child development. So stay tuned for the list of all those presentations, and we hope that you can join us as we go further into our parent discussion series this year. But for today, what we're going to be talking about are some specific things that we have found are helpful for families, parents to be thinking about as they help their children to become ready for a new school year, and quite honestly, to help you as the parents become ready for a new school year. Whereas you might be incredibly relieved that finally you're going to be able to wake up and send your kids off to school and let somebody else babysit them for the next 7 hours of each day. The reality is that this transition into a new school year is stressful for everybody within a family. And so we're going to touch on some topics that will hopefully allow that process to go as smoothly as possible. So I'm going to share my screen here. And this PowerPoint presentation will come out to you in your inbox. So you will be able to refer to all of the information in here directly on your own. So just sit back and listen and enjoy. If you have any questions as we're going through, feel free to type them into the chat segment so that we can keep an eye on that and answer questions as we go through. And we think we've saved some time at the end for about 10 or 15 minutes to answer questions as well. First, what I want to do is introduce your presenters for this morning. I myself am Chris Bogart. I'm the co-executive director of Sasco River Center, a child clinical psychologist, have specialized over my career in developmental issues in children. Samantha?
Hi there, my name is Samantha Gadsden. I'm an executive function and learning coach here at Sasco. I came here actually after 15 years of teaching in mainly at the middle school level, a bit in the elementary level, and a bit in the high school level. So I'm excited to speak to you all today.
And Allie.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Allie Muzzio. I am an occupational therapist. I received my education from Quinnipiac University, and I'm very happy to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about starting the new school year as successfully as possible. I'm going to cover the issues relating to setting your child up for success on the social emotional realm, as long as I can move this PowerPoint forward, which was working before, and now, for some reason, has decided to glitch on me. There we go. And so our agenda for today, we're going to talk about the critical role of executive functions. And you might be wondering, why touch on executive functions when we're talking about a new school year? And by the time we finish today, hopefully you will understand that the executive function system is really at the basis of helping everybody be able to adjust to transitions and be able to most effectively settle into new routines. And so we're going to start out talking about the critical role of the executive function system. I'm going to talk a little bit about helping your child and yourself remain emotionally balanced through some very specific, hopefully very practical suggestions. I'm going to then turn it over to Samantha to talk about helping your child get back into that learning mode. And then Allie's going to talk about supporting your child's sensory needs, and we'll provide you with some references, and we'll have some time for questions and answers. So hopefully this will be a helpful agenda to cover. But if there are questions that you have that we don't hit on, as I said, please type them into the chat and we will answer that. So why the issue of executive functions? Why the critical role of executive functions? So Russell Barkley, some of you may know him. He is a researcher who has been incredibly influential in the area of executive functions, attention issues in kids, many learning issues in kids. He's a clinical psychologist that worked for many years up at Harvard. Now he's down, I think, in North Carolina. But his view on executive functions is that it really executive functions have nothing to do with a child's intelligence or aptitude. Executive functions are that part of the brain that helps you put into practice all the things that you know. And so you could have the most gifted child out there, and if their executive function system is not turned on and operating, it's not going to help them to be able to get from point A to point B. So he says it's not about knowing what to do, your cognitive abilities. It's about doing what you know, putting it into practice. And Randy Frost, an educator and theoretician, talks about the deficits in executive functions such as planning, categorization, organization, and attention leave a child lost amidst a sea of things, unable to figure out what to do next. So you can sometimes see that deer in the headlights look of your child comes down after you've told them to go upstairs, get their backpack, while they're up there, brush their teeth. Could they bring down that homework slip that they had to sign and all these different pieces? You've given them 3 or 4 directions. They show up back downstairs and they have none of these things done, and they're looking like the deer in the headlights. And it's because they know that they were supposed to do something, and now they've gotten to the point where they're facing the person who asked them to do this, and now they're lost because they can't remember what they were supposed to do, in what order they were supposed to do it. And when that happens, that very often triggers off this feeling of overwhelm. We might, as parents or educators, interpret it as them being oppositional, or you're just not listening, or why don't you try harder, or all of these different value judgments of why they didn't do what they were supposed to do, when more often than not, it's simply their executive function system hasn't turned on effectively to support them in getting things done. And so what are executive functions? I'm sure that pretty much everybody on this Zoom has heard this 100 times, but it's always worth revisiting and re-emphasizing what the executive function system is, because as a developmental psychologist, I will tell you that more often than not, when kids are not performing up to their potential, it is because of some disconnect in their executive function system not effectively helping them. And so our executive functions are the skills that are needed to help any person to stop, take a step back, and regulate his or her behavior, emotions, thoughts. It's that strategic thinking part of the brain. It's what helps you, me, our children get from point A to point B in as relatively a straightforward and efficient way as possible. And I always love to share with parents the metaphor that I think very often clicks into place what the executive function system does in our brain. As I said, it's not the thinking part of the brain. It's not the, can I figure out how to do X, Y, and Z based upon my knowledge? What it is, it's the part of the brain that pulls it all together in an organized way. And so if you have the most talented orchestra members, you have the most talented strings instrument, you have the most talented percussion section, you have the most talented horns and trumpets and all of these different pieces, and then you tell them, go, play, and it just sounds like noise because there is nobody there to help pull it together in an organized way, to tell this section to come on, this section to quiet, this section to move a little bit more slowly, this section to pick up the tempo. is the executive functions are the conductor in our brain, the coaching staff of all the different members of the different systems. And so you have a child learning to read, and the child may understand what their letters are. They may understand even what all these words mean. They might have the best language system out there. But if the child can't pull together the tempo of what to be reading, tie it into prior learning, be able to move through at a pace that they're internalizing the information, they get to the end of the reading passage and they forget everything that they've gone through. If they're learning how to do math, they don't know how to do things in sequence, not because they don't understand numbers and don't understand some of the different algorithms and functions, but they're not putting it together in an organized and strategic fashion. That's the executive function system. It impacts every task we do, everything from brushing our teeth to cooking a meal to figuring out how to get from your home to your workplace or to your school. We all have executive functions. We all need them. It's what underlies everything that we do. And the reason why it's important in helping our kids get settled into a new school year and helping you get settled into a new school year is because it's what allows us to be able to put into place all that we know about how to approach school more effectively. All that we've learned in the past can be sitting there dormant, waiting for us to tap on it. And it's our executive function system, our routines, our plans, our strategies, our sequences, all of that that is housed in the executive function system that allows us to put it into practice. And so I'm guessing that everybody again on this Zoom has heard of the concept of summer slide. And very often educators have approached summer slide from the perspective of, oh, we got to go back to what you kids were learning last year in January and February, and we've got to reteach it again. And we've got to reteach all of these things that you forgot over the summer because everybody has slid back several months in terms of their knowledge base. I'm here to tell you that that's not accurate. Summer slide does not have to do with kids forgetting what they've learned. What it has to do is kids not having their executive function system turned back on effectively so that their underlying knowledge of what the steps are of how to approach this and their ability to approach it sequentially and strategically is not effectively allowing them to access their prior knowledge. And so summer slide is not about teaching kids all the stuff they've learned before. Summer slide is about getting kids back into their routines, getting them back into understanding all of the steps underlying the learning of any different task, getting them back into all of the different ways that their brain turns on and they use their memory system and they strategically approach things and efficiently approach things. And when you can turn the executive function system back on effectively, summer slide disappears, okay? And so from a brain perspective, it's about turning that light bulb on in the front of the brain. The light bulb is where the executive function system is housed. That's the master orchestra conductor, or it's the head coach of the team that ties together all of the other different parts of the brain, the auditory processing system in the temporal lobe, the visual processing system in the occipital lobe, the parietal system housing all of the different sensory capabilities, the language centers of the brain between the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, the memory systems in the temporal lobe, many of the motor functions in the cerebellum and the occipital lobe and the parietal lobe. So all of these different pieces are coordinated and organized by that light bulb in the prefrontal cortex that has to turn on for kids to be able to be effective in approaching things. And so for you to be able to support balance in your child and in yourself and in your family system, here are just some main pieces that I would tune you into that are really going to help that executive function system come back onto, turn back on so that the child is able to function on a more effective and consistent basis. So first thing is shifting the daily schedule. Some of you have kids who have already started school this week. Some of the public schools have already gotten into session. Some of you are from the private school end of the school system, and they generally start next week right after Labor Day. Either way, I would really encourage you to focus very much about getting the daily schedule back in place, getting kids used to waking up earlier. This coming weekend, it may be very tantalizing to go back to let's sleep late and everybody get up and do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it in the morning, and let's really enjoy this beautiful Labor Day weekend. I would agree. Let's enjoy the Labor Day weekend. Let's do lots of fun things, but make sure you keep the schedule relatively in place. Everybody getting up earlier, everybody going through the routine of getting up, getting themselves ready and dressed and stuff like that, and then move into the relaxation part of the day. It takes the brain multiple days to get back onto a schedule. It takes about 1 to 2 days for every 30 to 60 minutes that you want the child to get back into that daily schedule. And so if your kid has been used to waking up around 9, 10 o'clock, but now they've got to wake up at 6 o'clock, it's going to take a full week or so before they start getting into that daily schedule. So let's make sure that you're putting that into place as consistently as possible. I would really encourage everybody to make the commitment this year to have a weekly family meeting. I always like to guide families to do this on Sundays because it's a great way to organize yourself for the coming week. And what you do in these family meetings, it doesn't have to be long. It can be 10 minutes, but you pull out a family calendar. You say, what's coming up this week? Oh, Johnny, you've got soccer practice Tuesday and Thursday. Let's put it on the calendar. Oh, you've got a test on Friday. Let's put on the calendar and let's put in here on Wednesday to make sure we're starting to prepare for this. Grandmom and grandpop are coming next weekend. Let's put it on the calendar so that we know what we need to have done before that. This just helps everybody to start thinking ahead, which is a big component of the executive function system. And having that organizing time, as I said, it doesn't need to be long, but it just allows everybody to be on the same page and to be thinking forward. Scheduling in some quiet time. And what I mean by that is turning off your phones, turning off your laptops, turning off the television, turning off your iPads. This is just quiet time and could be 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day where everybody, parents included, just have some quiet time where you need to sit and read. You can draw something. You can lay in your bed and just stare at the ceiling. You can go outside for a walk, but it's just quiet time to settle your mind. And I would put this in every day of the week because it's just a good time to help the brain to settle. What that does is it helps the executive function system to tune up a little bit so that it's able to start thinking and planning more effectively by building in little bits of time where you're not constantly programmed and doing your next activity and running to catch up. Having that 30 minutes of mindfulness, quiet interlude helps the brain to function at a higher level of performance. Focus on the positives. What I mean by that is most of our kids are going to be anxious or just negative about, oh, I don't want to go back to school again. I can't stand the idea of starting homework. I can't stand the idea of the schedules picking up. Try to focus a little bit on the fun things that your child is going to be doing by going back to school, seeing their friends again, being able to get back into some of their activities that they love doing, being able to meet a new teacher, being able to be a part of a new group that they weren't a part of last year. Try to focus on the positives without in any way glossing over the negatives in the situation, without glossing over the reality of, yes, it does mean some homework time. Yes, it does mean that you got to adhere to other people's schedules more. But if you can also balance that out with some positives, that's going to be really useful. Try to plan in some little social time with kids that are in your child's class. Most of your kids have a little bit new classroom composition. There may be some of their best friends that aren't in their class for this coming year. Try to look at the class list and try to come up with a couple of kids that they can be scheduled in with for a little bit of a play date, a little bit of social time, get together with their families. just to build that connection so that when they go into their classroom for the first few times, they've got a few sort of safe harbors, kids they already know, kids they're already comfortable with, so that they can feel that connection. Empathize with their worries, but support the attitude of you got this. Again, many of our kids are going to be feeling all of that anxiety that starts with a new school year, things that they feel like they're not going to be able to handle all the extra work, a teacher that they might be scared about. Really try to empathize, reinforce the idea of, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been through this myself. Don't deny the fact that this is tough, but support the idea with that underlying message of, and I know you've got this. Really approaching stress and anxiety as a parent with that message of, I understand, I get what you're feeling. I've got faith that you've got this. You've been able to handle this before. You remember when you handled this, when you started in that soccer team last year. Remember you felt this way last year with your teacher, and that teacher turned out to be your favorite teacher ever. Really emphasize the idea that you've got this, and take opportunities to get to know the teacher. If they have those, come in, see the classroom, meet your teacher, walk around the school. Definitely take advantage of that. Take advantage of any opportunity to get to know the teacher. Give your child the idea that this teacher is not going to be some scary, mean, horrible person. This is going to be somebody that's there as your child's advocate. And the final piece before I'm going to begin turning this over to Samantha is take the time to organize the home environment. What I mean by that is really anticipate what your kids are going to need to be a successful student. Make sure you get all the different colors of construction paper and file folders with different colors, and all the pens and paper and scissors and staplers and all these different things. Organize a little spot that is your child's spot for doing their homework, their quiet place that they can go to, so that they can get back into that routine of work being done in a specific spot, and they can't use all these avoidance strategies of, oh, we don't have what I need to get through this assignment. Make sure the home environment is organized. And the final thing I'm going to say is try to program these 4 pieces into every single day, what I call the 4 musts at any day. Take time to laugh. Find something that was a humorous part of your day, or set up in your family dinner. Everybody's got a turn to be able to come up with a joke or something funny to laugh at. Laughter reduces your blood pressure. It allows a sense of calm to enter into your brain. Make sure that there's regular sleep times and wake up times. Just 1 hour of loss of sleep has been shown to reduce children's cognitive capacity by up to 1 year. So try to make sure that you're emphasizing a regular sleep pattern. Plug in play, purposeless periods of time where kids can just go out and create or do whatever they want. Plug in play every day, and make sure that you set up all the routines. And with that word of routines, I'm going to turn it over to Samantha, who's going to pick up on the idea of the value of routines in learning.
Thank you so much. I want you to think way back to June when school first got out. And you might remember what it was like to have there was a bit of trouble kind of getting back into that sort of summer. You may have trouble getting into sort of that summer flow. It might have taken a couple days. And so I'd like you to remember the fact that it's going to take the same thing for your child and for you to do that here now that the school year has started. So we're going to be talking about rebooting the brain, or getting back into that learning mode, which is so important. And it's funny because in the middle of the year, it feels effortless. You've gotten used to it. You're in a flow. It's a lot more challenging at the beginning of the year when you're still figuring it out. So we'll be talking about the importance of planning, of routines, of organization, of proactivity. We're really talking about those executive function skills and how we can use them to sort of make the start of the year and then the rest of the year go really well. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about schedules. Life is really busy. Our children are busier than they have ever been before. They're full of activities and they're full of things that they need to do and appointments. And so that means that they have a lot going on. And you need to act in many ways as the front of their brain for them. And so you need to help them make sense of the days and the weeks. Now, it might seem that this is only for younger children, but that's not the case. Even up to teenagers sometimes need help to put their weeks in order, to understand what it is. There we go. What it is that they need to do each day. And the trick for this, as Chris mentioned, is communication. My recommendation is that family meeting is a great time, or even a Monday morning over breakfast talking about, so here's what we have going on this week. If your child is younger, sometimes instead breaking it into smaller bits. So maybe it's you just mainly talk about Monday, Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, and then you do the rest of the week later on. But kind of helping to model that idea of understanding what's coming up to help your child really understand how time works and how to plan for the week and how you can prepare for it. Next slide. All right. And we can't talk about schedule and not talk about routines. So routines are more the order of events. These are the things that we do consistently pretty much every day. We tend to think about morning routines and evening routines. That's often going to be things like, when you get up in the morning, what are the things you do before you get out the door? Or at night, before you go to bed, what are the things you need to do before your head hits the pillow? Now, you may find that there is some pushback about routines. Sometimes children especially want to do things on a different schedule every day in their own way. The fact is, though, we all need routines, adults and children, because predictability, which routines give us, it makes us feel safe. We know what we're kind of doing next. We're not having to second guess ourselves. We can kind of just move through. Routines should be flexible, however, and they will change over time. So just keep that in mind. But routines allow us to be prepared for school, for sports. It allows us to get out of the house in the morning without feeling like we're terribly rushed or feeling like we don't know what to do next. We can go to places we need to go to without a lot of stress, and that allows us to be more efficient and more productive. Because with a lower stress level and with less kind of a frantic start to the day, it means that your executive function skills can operate in the best way possible. If you think about yourself, if you're running super late for something, and you're running around the house and you're trying to, find your shoes and find your bag and find your keys, I'm sure you recognize that at that moment, your executive function skills are not top notch. You may have trouble deciding what to do next. You may have trouble keeping your emotions in check. So by keeping that stress low, that means better executive function for the rest of the day. All right, next slide, please. All right, one of the questions I get asked a lot as an executive function coach is thinking about organization and how to keep organized, how to stay organized. So these tips are sort of things that work all the time, but I find that with the kind of the flood of stuff that comes into our homes at the start of the school year, this becomes even more important. So the very first thing is to give everything a home, because if things don't have a home where they live, then they float. And when things float, they get lost. And when they get lost, we spend a lot of time looking for them and stressing over them, maybe buying more of them. So decide where things belong in your house and then do your best to get them to end up there after use. I know that's tricky. I know especially with children that doesn't always happen, but giving things a home makes it much easier to kind of keep things on track and organized. The next thing is to keep things where you use them. Now, this one is kind of counterintuitive in a way, because we often think that things belong in a certain place and that's where they belong. So for example, if your children always do their homework at the dining room table, keep their school supplies in the dining room. I know that that's not generally where we think to keep school supplies, but if your supplies can be where you use them, you're less likely to lose them, and then they don't have the excuse to wander around the house looking for things. At the same time, if every day, right before your child heads out to the bus, you brush their hair, then keep the hairbrush in the entryway. I know we usually think, the hairbrush belongs in the bathroom or in the bedroom, but in that case, it might be easier. It's just more likely for that object that you need to be where you like it, so that you're not looking for it, which can make things feel a lot more frantic. The classic using a planner or a checklist to keep yourself on track. This has the added bonus of modeling for your children what sort of how a planner works and how you use it. It's great if you can show them, let's check my planner. I feel like we had something today. Or, oh, let's make a checklist of all the things we need to do before we leave the house. It can be digital, it can be paper, whatever's going to work for your family is really, really helpful. Possibly my favorite phrase, and I use it all the time, both with my own children and with my clients, is helping out future you. Don't think about current you. Current you is always going to want to take the easy way out, but future you can be helpful towards. Think of them as one of your friends. So future you tomorrow morning probably doesn't want to run around the house looking for your shoes. You tomorrow morning probably doesn't want to have to pack your entire lunch and think and make all those choices and think about all those things. Future you probably doesn't want to have to, find notebooks and find books. Future you just wants to get up and get their stuff and get out the door. So help future you. That could be laying out your clothes the night before, helping your child to lay out their clothes the night before. It could be packing your backpack as full as possible and as complete as possible the night before. It's all the things that you do that will make your morning easier. So those executive function skills are absolutely firing when the day starts. All right, next one. All right, technology. I know we all look at technology and think, I wish I could just shut my child's technology use down and be done with it, because it can be such a tricky thing. But remember, unfortunately, as much as it can be tricky, because we know how the brain reacts to technology, we know that it sucks us in, both adults and children. It is necessary, especially in school. So know the tech tools that your children are using. Even younger children are using technology now. It could be that their grammar, their vocab, their math is on the computer. They could be reading on the computer. Older children may be using things like Google Classroom or Schoology to help keep them organized, and they're excellent tools. But if you know what they need the computer for, then that means that it can help you to set some clear limits as to when they're using technology, and when they are, when they really should be shutting it down. As technology is so tricky because it's easy to be sucked in, both for children and adults, there are apps out there that can help you. I have not personally used these, but I know there are apps that people have had success with. And you can look them up. There are some like Bark, and I think Norton has one, and there are a bunch of other ones. They're worth researching to kind of track your family, but they're also ones that limit screen time, and they're really good for adults too. There's one that I think it grows a tree based on how long you're not on your screens. There's one called Off Time, one called Flip. There's a whole bunch of them out there that can help limit that screen time, which can be really, really helpful. Next one, please. All right, I'm just gonna, oh, there we go, perfect. Okay, so finally, thinking about how you can be proactive as a parent for your child at the start of the school year. The very first thing is just asking questions and then listening to the answers. You don't need all the answers of how to fix every problem that they have, but asking the questions: which classes are you worried about? What did you struggle with last year? What could help make it easier this year? Can help kind of shine a spotlight on the things that are challenging for them. Often many of these things, as Chris mentioned, are rooted in executive function. So maybe there are things that you can help scaffold, that you can help them with as they go through the year. But also remembering that you are not alone. There are people to help you out, both in school and out of school. There are advisors and teachers and other outside sources like SASCO who are all here to help you and to help you navigate your child's learning and to help them feel really good. Because at the end of the day, all we really want is to empower our children. All we want is for them to be able to advocate for themselves. We want them to feel good about their learning so they can have a really, really great school year. So I wish you all a great school year, and I'm going to pass you on to Allie, who will talk to you about supporting your child's sensory needs.
Thank you so much, Samantha. So hello, everyone. I'm Allie. I'm an occupational therapist. And just to reiterate what occupational therapy is, so in my role, I help you or your children with what they want and need to do, such as schoolwork or doing something with chores in the household in order to do, like I said, everyday meaningful activities. And this has to do with school, this has to do with play, this has to do with all the occupations that we go through every day. That rhymed. So in my role, one of the approaches that we take is the sensory integrative approach. And we think of the big five senses. We know about smell, we know about taste, sight, touch, and hearing. But what I like to tell you is that there's actually 2 or sometimes 3 more senses that we use in order to integrate and process what's going on around us. So the next slide, I'll tell you more about the 2 systems that we don't know as much about, which is the vestibular and the proprioceptive systems. So I'd like to talk first about the vestibular system. So the vestibular system houses our movement input, and this is located in our inner ear. It controls our sense of movement, like I said, balance and posture, and it gives us orientation of where we are in space. It's generally housed by gravity and where we are in space. There's also the proprioceptive system, and this is housed in our muscle and joint receptors. It gives us a sense of body awareness and orients ourselves to certain body parts and how they relate to ourselves. So whenever I think of proprioception, this has to do with pushing, carrying, lifting, and pulling objects. So anything that gives us quote unquote heavy work can help us calm our senses and give us that attention towards our body input. Next slide, please. So I added this slide to give you a better understanding of what sensory integration is. And sensory integration was founded by the theorist, Jean Ayres, who is one of the influences in occupational therapy. And she had created this approach of sensory integration. And to give you a better understanding, sensory integration is the organization of sensation for use. And so with this image, I'd like to present to you, the input that comes in, what comes in dictates what comes out. And so we have the input sensory wise. So let's say we have smell input. This goes directly to our brain and gives us an output of what the sense is. So what we take in dictates what comes out. And so this has to do with sensory processing difficulties that some children may have, that the input doesn't always be processed correctly if certain skills are not foundationed, which I'll show you in the next slide with a wonderful pyramid to our learning. So just to give you a better understanding, I always like to discuss sensory integration with this visual. And so with sensory integration, at the bottom, there are our sensory systems, and our sensory systems start at the bottom. These are our foundational skills. And as we move up this pyramid, if we don't have these sensory processing skills in order, or if we're not regulated, then these impact these higher order thinking, which is higher up in the pyramid. So if we are dysregulated with our sensory systems, then we will not be using our systems that house behavior, academic learning in our proper sense. So we need to be able to organize our senses in order to improve on our higher learning skills. And so how our higher level skills are built are due to our sensory processing. Next slide, please. Yes. So there are many ways that sensory processing can present challenges. However, for the purpose of this presentation, I just want to focus on the areas that will most impact academics, especially with back to school. So when it comes to attention, there are many ways that sensory processing can impact that. If a child is over or under processing sensory wise, then if they need movement to activate their system, that helps them pay attention. Because our vestibular system, going back to that, is closely linked to a certain area in our brain that connects to arousal regulation, and it impacts attention also. The ability to sit still is also impacted by sensory integration. It requires intact postural strength and an intact vestibular system, as I mentioned. There's also organizational skills, which can result from the ability to utilize higher order cognitive skills to plan and execute tasks. If you're having to utilize cognitive effort to process daily sensory inputs, you're going to struggle to complete a more complex task, such as organization or executive functioning. When it comes to vision, in some cases, visual distractibility, if you're ever over-responsive to visual input, or if a child that has more, who is more sensitive to visual or light input, you may be more alert or in a fight or flight for visual changes within your environment. And this can impact children in the school system or just in school, because if they are over-responsive to visual input, then that would make them more dysregulated, especially in the classroom with other students. And then for fine motor skills, almost all academic activities such as writing, coloring, cutting, drawing, just using certain tools in the classroom require fine motor skills, which is the use of our hands. And so challenges with sensory processing can interrupt or impact a child's fine motor skills. Or as I previously stated, they may need to add more cognitive effort, which is really disorganizing, can be. Next slide, please. And so what should we watch out for sensory-wise? How do we know when our child is dysregulated? And so a couple of areas that you can focus on when you see your child dysregulated or just some behaviors include being fatigued very quickly or having a difficult time with independent work. They may or may not have too little or too much energy. They could zone out. They could be frustrated or just have a low frustration tolerance. They could quickly snap. And then sometimes children, you can see them fidgeting because they need that movement. Next slide, please. And so sensory breaks. Sensory breaks can be organizing input in intentional order, which in the further slides, I'll give you an example and demonstrate a sensory break that you can do. But just to touch base on sensory breaks, these can be from 5 to 20 minutes. They can be done in any kind of setting, such as the home. They can be done in the classroom, or they can be done whenever you're out and about, but they can be from 5 to 20 minutes, giving you that intentional activity input so that your child can be regulated. So they can be done with just one person. They can be done with the entire family. As I said, it can be from 5 to 20 minutes. I'd say once or twice a day, depending on how much dysregulation you're seeing, and just touching base with your occupational therapist too. It can be done in the home environment. I wanted to touch base on what Chris had mentioned about quiet time. Something that you can do with your children is also implement a quiet corner. This can be done after school when you see them really upset or overwhelmed about something, or if they're just in a high emotive state. And so you can have a quiet corner that has limited distractions, very dim lighting. This can be done like under a tarp or just some kind of cloth to give your child a corner. It can be for every child also, so it's not just one person's thing that they do. It can be everyone can be involved in it too. Dim lighting, limited electronics, because we want to not deprive, but lower our sensory organization or lower our arousal so we can become more organized. Next slide, please. And so what activities can I use? So for vestibular, we want to do more movement associated with it. So if you want to do movement associated with like a scooter board, they would love that, or something that has to do with swings, giving them input like going to the playground and going on swings. You can do something what I like to call airplane twirls. So you have your child put your arms out to the sides and then spin in one direction like they're an airplane, and then spinning in the other direction. These can be for the little kids. I'd say for the older kids, you can do something with more of the swinging, with more of the, we have something called animal walks too. So you can make them walk like certain animals, such as when they are having a hard time for, say, going from watching TV to the dinner table. Okay, I want you to do bear crawls. to the dinner table, making it a fun transition to get to where you need to be through movement. Through proprioception, any kind of activity, like I said earlier, about pushing, pulling, lifting, and carrying. Those are the four main things I like to think of with proprioception, because that has to do with heavy work. Animal walks are also proprioceptive input. You can also do, if you're doing laundry, you can also have the kids push the laundry across the floor, or you can do something having to do with that. So like I said, pushing, pulling, carrying, and lifting. And then lastly, for respiration, this is all about bringing your child back to center, giving them some mindfulness, and also just lowering their arousal level so that they are ready for what they need to do. So for respiration, you can do something I like to do called volcano breathing. For the little kids, you raise your arms like you're a volcano, and then exhale and erupt is what I like to say. So you inhale, become a volcano, and then exhale and breathe out to erupt. You can also do bubbles. You can do snake breathing, or you can do, let's see who can do the longest S sound for as long as they can. So making it a fun, interactive way for children to get this input is very beneficial. Let's see if I have any more recommendations. Oh, if they're in the classroom, they can also do some kind of arm squeezes or hand squeezes, giving themselves a big hug, or they can ask you for a hug. That's proprioceptive input. But let's carry on for a sample sensory break. So if you have space where you are, absolutely stand up and join us in this demonstration. So what we're going to do is the sample sensory break. Again, intentionally ordering sensory activities promotes regulation. So for just to briefly talk about or do the 5-minute solution of applesauce. So you can do this with your children. So you're gonna do some movement. We're gonna reach up and down. We really like to reach up like this, go down and raise your arms toward the sky. So giving them this movement, going up and down, rotating their head so that they are getting that gravitational input also. So we want to pick up and take the apples and put them in our basket, right? That's applesauce. Now what do we do with the apples? We stomp the apples. So you want your kids to stomp on the apples. And if they're a big apple, you can make a big stomp. So we're stomping the apples. Do this for a minute, I'd say, or maybe you have them like move, make a big stomp, like I said. And so tactile, what you can do is the squeezing. So you can squeeze the apples, you can get some kind of putty or some kind of toy that they can squeeze, but what you want to do is do that squeezing at this point. And then respiration. So you can either do the breathing standing or sitting. But for the respiration, you can have the kids, let's say, pretend there is an apple, or you can have an apple with them. And just blow on the apple. So just having that input, like I said, promotes regulation. But if you do these in this order, I would start by doing it for once a day, or when you see your child frustrated or overwhelmed. But it's good to have this on a continuous or consistent frequency, just because it promotes the regulation. So, next slide, please. And then just some more recommendations on what you can use based on equipment that you can have is have a sensory toolbox. So you can use a laundry basket as a toolbox bin. Some tools that we recommend, I spoke to my colleagues, other occupational therapists. You can have a yoga ball. This is great for postural control. It also helps with if they are fidgeting, your children, then this is really helpful to get that movement input. Same with the Bosu bump. This helps with balance and postural control, that vestibular and movement input. A weighted ball is helpful for throwing, or like I said, lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling with proprioceptive input. Same with small bead fidgets. This can be used for the tactile aspect of sensory integration. And then you can also use painter's tape too for just all kinds of input. And that's all for me. I'm going to hand it over to Chris now, who's going to do some concluding thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Allie, and thank you, Samantha, for both of your thoughts and inputs. the main piece here, excuse me, for everybody to consider is that transitions are stressful for everybody. And so if you plan in the idea that there are going to be bumps in the road, there are going to be times where your child's having a temper outburst or looking like a 5-year-old when they should be looking like an 8 or a 10-year-old, those kinds of regressions are absolutely to be expected. Those are totally typical developmental pieces. It doesn't mean that your child has lost the gains that they've made over the last year. It doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to be stuck in this less mature regulating mode. It is just a measure that their nervous system, their sensory system is a little bit overwhelmed with getting back into the routines. When your child is getting really upset, what we always try to use is this little phrase, connect before you correct. And basically all that means is try to empathize with what your child is feeling before you jump into giving a correction. So before you say, you're going to lose your dessert time later today, or you're going to lose your iPad time, or before you jump into what the penalty is going to be able to just say, wow, I see you're going through a really rough time. I can see this is really tough for you. I totally get it. This is really hard to go back to school, or I totally get that it's hard to get back into all of these activities. That's okay. I've gone through this myself. Take a few deep breaths. Can you find something to calm yourself down, or just maybe take a little bit of time away from me, away from your siblings? Try to connect before you correct. That connection can often be all that you need to bring things back down to earth. And executive functions, keep that in your mind. That's at the base of so much of what's going on as they're getting back into the school year. If you want to reduce that summer slide, really move back into as many different routines as possible, have a clearly delineated, visible schedule, review that with your kids, organize the home environment, and make sure that you build into every single day some downtime, some time that is not structured, that's not filled with 100 different planned activities. Just have some downtime, that quiet time we talked about, but also that creative time. Just go out into the yard and play, find some sticks and make a little fort, do things that aren't necessarily with some goal in mind. Those types of things really help the brain to settle, help the executive function system to operate at its best. So those are the main things to try to keep in mind. Thank you guys for joining. If anybody has any questions, we've got about 5 minutes or so. If you want to type in a question, or feel free to unmute yourself and jump in with a question, we'd be happy to answer or go into more detail about anything. And these are just some bibliography items that we're going to send your way as well when we send out the PowerPoint. These are just some great executive function resources to help you organize your own approach to executive functions, and that these will help your kids be able to settle into a more planned and organized and strategic year as well.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Hi. I'd like to find out if you could talk, you or Samantha can talk a little bit about, not so much about like the routine, but also about when a child is in school, either at a regular school or like at preschool, about how to deal with calming yourself down and also getting yourself into like a routine once you come back from recess, how to work with a child to calm itself down, and from that transition period from there. And then the transition period, and maybe this is a lot, but also coming home with that transition period too, what do you kind of do with that? Is there like some type of break in there too that you should be doing as well?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, great question. And you really put your finger on something that I think we often don't think about, is we're not just talking about the transition back into the school year, but every day has countless transitions: the transition from sleeping to being awake, the transition from getting out of the door in the morning into the car, into the school, going into the classroom, moving from one class to the next. So there's these countless transitions, and it is in transitions that very often kids feel the greatest amount of stress. I think the teachers and parents also feel the greatest amount of stress. And so what we try to do is we do a lot of work consulting with schools around this exact issue, and obviously talking with parents about it. The most important thing is first of all, set your own expectations that it's going to take a little bit of time for your child to be able to start navigating these transitions effectively, because the child needs to start to have a better sense of what is coming next. And when you're going into a new school year with a new teacher, the transitions aren't the same ones that they had last year or the year before. And so what we try to get teachers to do is at the very beginning of the day say, okay, when everybody comes in the classroom, this is how we're going to do it here. Your book bag goes in your cubby or in your locker, or and when you do that, I want you to come in and just settle in your desk for a moment. I want you to pull out a pencil, make sure your pencil, and so we have teachers very explicitly and transparently lay out, here are all the different steps to transitioning into the classroom in the morning, transitioning into recess, what your choices are, transitioning out of recess. What we try to have teachers do, and I would recommend parents do this as well, is when you are transitioning from a high movement activity, if you're running around the yard outside, or you're running around during a recess period and then coming back in and you have to now stop and focus, you need a little bit of time to do that. And so that's the place where some of what Allie was talking about in terms of using respiration, using, kind of getting yourself into a calmer spot in your chair, really trying to pay attention to the seat underneath you, what that feels like. If there are handles on the chair, kind of grabbing them and just holding on to them for a little bit. Anything that tends to ground you is going to help transition into that. And any language that helps the child to think ahead of, okay, we're going to be wrapping up in 1 minute and you're going to be coming back inside. When you go back inside, you're going to see a piece of paper on your desk, and that's what we're going to do next. If you can set the visual, set the expectation of what they're moving into, guide them to some breaths, guide them to kind of slowly moving into that next piece, you're going to be ahead of the game, but also recognizing it's going to take time to build those routines. I'm not sure if any of my co-presenters have other things to add to that.
I was just going to say that predictability is incredibly important. And so if you can sort of, think about what the steps will be in that transition, and, kind of have things happen the same way, really create a routine. And then, if they're old enough to understand, and even if they're not, to really understand time, explain, okay, we're going to, how much time do we need now that we're off the bus? Think about dismissal from school tends to be very loud. It's one of the probably the least organized times of the day for children. For the adults, it's very organized. They know where everyone is, but it tends to be loud. And so think about, okay, how much time do we need to calm down? What are we going to do those things that Allie talked about? And then moving into, whatever the routine is, but putting time on it and letting them understand that it is a transition, that is what you are doing, I think can be really helpful.
Maurice, does that answer what you were looking for?
Yes. But it's also wanted to know too, do you need to work with the teacher as well to kind of go through that process as well as a parent? Do you need to, like, say at back to school night or something, hey, what are some of the things that I can help you with as a teacher? Because if, for like example, if the teacher is like only one person in class and she has like 17 kids, it's kind of hard to try to do like all 17 kids, or like, kind of work with that type of situation with everyone. Or even if your kid is even if your kid's like I have a kid in pre-K4, they're two teachers. How do you work with that situation as well?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think the beauty of the educational system, some of the training for teachers, is that they are much more aware of helping teachers to really understand the challenges within transitions. And I think teachers come at it with a much better skill set in this area. And I know all the schools we work with, they're so much more mindful of some of the sensory components that play into supporting transitions, and really setting that up. But what I would suggest is if you notice that there are things that really help your child to transition, and when they're not, when these different components aren't in place, your child tends to get more dysregulated. I would definitely mention, we've noticed that this really helps Susie or Johnny to kind of calm and move into the next activity really effectively. My bet is if it works for your child, it's going to work for most of the other kids as well. So yeah, I definitely would share what you found has been successful. So, couple quick questions that also came up in the chat, and then I think we're going to wrap up in a moment. But Sean mentions perhaps these will be topics for another session. Best practices to calm your senses to prepare for wind down and sleep, and then what also happens with nutrition. What we will do is we will try to put more intentional stuff into some of our future lessons on this. But sleep, I would say, is one of the areas that is probably most conducive to the idea of routines. What we tend to call good sleep hygiene is what we would recommend you guys be thinking of. Sleep hygiene is nothing more than the idea of, for that hour before bedtime, really kind of guiding your child away from any technology, really cutting down. You don't want them to be having all the impacts from the blue light waves and things like that, which tend to reduce mess up the melatonin balance in the brain. You want to kind of guide them away from technology into some calmer activity. It can be, obviously, reading to kids is wonderful, listening to some music, just sitting around chatting and kind of rubbing your child's back. What I often put in there is something that's going to calm the physical system. So if you can get your child to take a nice warm bath or a shower before they go to bed, that tends to calm their system. You want to make sure the room is as cool as possible without it obviously being cold, but a cool room tends to promote sleep. And it really is all about the routine of having as close to the same bedtime as possible, the same steps that lead up to bedtime in terms of brushing your teeth and getting on your PJs and things like that, the same time that you spend with the parent and the child together. All of those types of routines tend to really help sleep move much more effectively. Nutrition, same thing, is obviously, there's a huge realm of information on nutrition. We are going to be doing a presentation on some different holistic facets to health and wellness as part of our connection and curiosity and compassion series and stuff like that. But the nutrition piece that's most important is, and this ties in with sleep, is obviously having as balanced a diet. I mean, all these things you all know, a balanced diet, very few heavy sugary foods, especially later in the evening, really having a real nice balance between proteins and complex carbs and some fats and things like that, and quantity, and eating slowly and really concentrating on taking a very mindful approach to eating is so important in terms of digestion as well. All of those different pieces are going to be critical, and we'll try to weave some of those things into future things as well. Okay. So I think what we're going to do is wrap up at that point. Thank you, everybody, for joining. You will see the presentation as well as the PowerPoint in your inbox. And please plan to tune in first